The legislature will convene shortly. The first senators up in the queue: Senator Walz, Senator Dungan, Senator Clements, Senator Blood.
Members will now come back to session. Senator Duncan, you are recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening, colleagues, and for those who are joining back in to the legislature. As you know, if you've watched before, when you come back from a meal, there's oftentimes not a lot of people in the room, so I will tell people at home who cannot see the entire room, there's very few people in here right now. But never fear, I'm sure they will come back and we will continue this robust conversation regarding LB 441 and the other amendments. I do rise again in support of the bracket motion and opposed to LB 441 as well as the amendments. I know I was gone for a little while, so I missed some of the conversation that we had prior to dinner. So I apologize for anybody watching consistently if I repeat myself or other people. But I wanted to continue the point that I was on earlier, which is that there is, in fact, a differentiation between things that are obscene and things that are risque or simply uncomfortable. And the law actually goes into very specific detail about what is obscene and what's not. And so I know that historically there's been, I think, the Supreme Court case that people joke about, at least in the legal community, if you don't know what pornography is for sure, but you know it when you see it, to paraphrase. But there is actually a very specific definition of obscene in our statutes as well as our case law. And so simply because books or videos or movies contain things in them that are perhaps sexual in nature or perhaps adult in theme does not make them obscene. And I think that that's an important delineation to keep in mind when we're talking about this. I had a chance to watch the State Board of Education meeting from March where a presentation was given to the School Board of Education, and there were clips or snippets of books that were read into the record that contained descriptions of sexual acts. And taken just by themselves with no context, I can understand how somebody would be taken aback by that, especially hearing that kind of language in a quote unquote professional setting. But what I think is always important is to keep in mind the context with which those passages are written. So you may have a book that is 500 pages long, a work of literary classic. I can't think of a great example off the top of my head that has maybe a page or two that contains some somewhat adult material. Just because there is that adult material contained in the book does not make the entirety of that book obscene, nor does it make that entire piece an obscene material that would be in violation of the law if it's distributed in the schools. And I think that's also vital to keep in mind. A couple of passages in a book that otherwise provides literary, cultural, artistic, or even historical value is not something that should invalidate it from being given out to students. We already have in place mechanisms, as we've already stated before, at the local level, both at the librarian level, the teacher level, the school board level, the city government level. All of those local control units can have, I think, a really good say as to what our students actually have access to. And so the fact that we are legislating top down in the way that we are here, the way that we are saying this is important and this is not, and trying to, I guess, put our perspectives into local issues is problematic. I also think, taken as a whole, the conversation that I've been able to hear so far, there continues to be a misunderstanding of what the current state of the law is versus what this would actually change. Make no mistake about it. What LB 441 does is it deprives individuals who currently have a particular defense available to them from exercising that defense down the road. It is not an immunity. It is not a ban and bar on any prosecution whatsoever. It is a defense that is allowed to be asserted at the trial by an individual, thank you, Madam President, by an individual who has been charged with a particular crime. And so saying that somebody gets an automatic pass from giving obscene material just because they're a teacher, or somebody gets an automatic pass from saying I'm not criminally liable for breaking the law just because I'm a librarian, is an oversimplification and I think an unintentional misunderstanding of what the current law states. So in the event that somebody is in fact distributing obscene material that is actually and factually legally obscene, that person could still be held liable under our statutes here today. So I want to continue to have this conversation. I want to make sure we fully understand what the current state of the law is, and I look forward to hearing more of the debate this evening. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Duncan. Senator Clements, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I stand in opposition to the bracket motion, and I support LB 441. I again agree that this is about protecting children. I've had this issue came up in my district in this last year where one citizen went through the library books in the school and was objecting to over 40 of them of being improper, and unfortunately wasn't able to get them removed. I think one was removed and 10 were put in on a restricted list, but 40 of them continue to be accessible by the students. And I just find that surprising that this is such a contentious issue. And evidently things have changed, but I really ask for your support for LB 441. I yield the rest of my time to Senator Albright.
Senator Albright, you're yielded 3 minutes and 42 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Clements. I appreciate that. And welcome back from dinner. It was a short time. But I want to address, and I know that a lot of folks haven't made it back here, but I'll certainly be happy to repeat it later. But I also had a bill. It's actually a resolution 24CA, so have to take this one to the vote of the people. But in education, I presented this on March 7th of 2023. And I'm going to give you just a brief recap of why I would like people to understand that it is our responsibility as legislators to attack issues that are prevalent to our constituency and that is something that could be possibly harmful to the children, but it is our duty and not anyone else's. So I'll just go through here. Here's a recap of how we arrived here. In 1952, a constitutional amendment established a state Department of Education, which acts under the authority of the State Board of Education. The role of the state superintendent of public instruction was transferred to the Board of Education or the Commissioner of Education in 1955. 1967, the legislature divided the state into 8 districts. And the membership of the State Board of Education was increased from 6 to 8 members in 1969, and the districts were realigned by 2011 in the legislature. In 2021, the State Board of Education presented the first draft of the health education standards. These standards created a crisis of confidence in the State Board of Education of our Department of Education, as evidenced by overwhelming number of Nebraska parents, grandparents, teachers, and others from all corners of the state who were standing in opposition to this content. Now, hear me out, folks. This Article 7 of the Constitution of the State of Nebraska says that the State Department of Education shall have general supervision and administration of the school system of the state and of such other activities as the legislature may direct. As we may direct. It also says that the duties and the powers of the State Board of Education shall be prescribed by the legislature, and the Commission of Education shall have the power and duties as the legislature may direct. So it is for us to figure out, what are we going to do with this? We really do have an issue, whether it's in the books, whether it's on our computers that the children are able to look at. But developing those health education standards was outside the scope of the duties the legislature has prescribed back in State Statute 79-760-01, which states, and I'm going to come back and continue to talk about this, but we can't sit here and say, well, I just don't think we should do that to the librarians or to teachers, or, they're not intentionally putting those books on the shelf, but somebody is. And somebody's our school boards, the superintendent, the State Board of Education, they're going to be posed to take action to remove some of these things so people don't have to go before a court of law and find out if what they just did was on the side of harming a child or obscenity. Obscenity is spelled
Time,
out.
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright and Senator Clements. Senator Blood, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Madam President. Fellow Senators, all 16 of you that are on the floor right now, I still stand in support of the bracket motion and not in support of the underlying bill with all the amendments. On your desks, and some of you have bothered to read and some of you have not, is a really good article that I remembered reading earlier in the month in reference to sexual violence. And what it pertains to is how so many of these laws have led to book banning. And I want to talk a little bit about some of the things that they're banning and how ultimately could hurt our children, not help our children, but hurt our children. So in Idaho, they decided that the word rape in any book needed to have that book removed from the shelf. So I want to make sure you understand there's an increase in sexual violence right now, which means more victims. So one of the books that they banned was J.C. Duggard's memoir. And I don't know if you remember J.C. Duggard, but she was kidnapped at 11 years of age, held hostage for 18 years, repeatedly raped, ended up bearing 2 children for her rapist before she was rescued. But because the word rape is in that book, these people, these kids will never be able to see her story and how she prevailed and how she survived. So if you read the article, it basically says, while banning these books, the committee did not comment on the vulgarity or obscenity of the real rapes occurring in their state, only the ones in print. In Oklahoma right now, there's a bill that's introduced this year that prohibits sex ed instructors from teaching about consent. They are no longer going to be able to teach about consent if this bill passes. I want you to look at the domino effect these types of bills are having on legislation all over the country. Access to information is crucial to addressing sexual violence and improving sexual health. Allowing children to read and learn about sexual violence does not cause more violence, according to facts and statistics and data. Data tells us that it does not cause more violence, but it does the opposite. And you can't censor rape away. If I were to say these topics, I'll ask Senator Albright, I was going to ask Senator Clements, but I don't see him here. Senator Albright, would you yield to a question?
Senator Albright, would you yield?
Sure.
If there was a book that had sex, violence, genocide, slavery, rape, and bestiality, would that be a book that should likely not be in a library?
That would be for the courts to decide. And again, I will be happy to read the things that fall into obscenity for you if you'd like.
I'm basing it on what I'm seeing across the country, but thank you for offering to do that.
Thank you.
The reason I brought that up is because all of those things are in the Bible. And so if indeed we start taking words and that the words have power, then when we take those books, we're also going to have to take the Bible out of the library because all of those things are in the Bible. For those of us that read the Bible. And for those of us that don't, more power to you because you do what you do and I'll do what I do and it all is a good thing. Earlier, Senator Albright said that K through 12 has to be protected. And that the people that came to the hearing last year showed up so they could protect the children in their neighborhoods and their families, in their churches, wherever it was that she said. But they cherry picked and tried to find the most offensive things they could find. And the one thing that nobody talked about, and I bring this up again, is the racism that we find in books. And I think it's interesting what people are offended by what things, and they don't realize the power that is in some of these lessons. When it comes to sexual violence, women, boys, men that are sexually assaulted need to understand that they are not alone and that it doesn't happen to just them and that they're not at fault. And many of these books that are being banned are books that can help people be strong. I just want us to be so careful when we pass laws like this. Thank you, Ms. President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Kavanaugh, you're recognized. Senator John Kavanaugh.
Thank you, Madam President. Well, now we're really into the first evening of the legislative session. So again, I rise in support of the bracket motion and opposed to the bill as currently written. And for those just tuning in, obviously everyone here is seeking to serve the best interests of the youth of the state of Nebraska. We're having a conversation about what is an appropriate bill to pass for the criminal regulation of librarians and teachers. So a few things have been said that I kind of wanted to touch on. One of them, I did appreciate Senator Albright answering the question about the declaratory judgments. And there are a couple of cases that come with those sections of statute that I would like to take a look at, but just my initial reaction is the declaratory judgments have to do with a preemptory, so a prospective. Somebody can go into a court and ask that some item is obscenity or not. They can ask a judge to make that determination. However, for the criminal statute, the finder of fact, the one who makes a determination about whether something is obscene, is a jury. And so the judge saying that a book is or is not obscene before someone's been charged criminally is not going to be binding on the outcome of any case that we're talking about here. So I'd like to read those cases and see what specifically this applies to, but it does not apply to the disposition of a criminal case. The other thing I wanted to make sure we're talking about is what exactly is the standard of review for these restrictions on speech, because that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about finding a way to draw a circle around certain types of speech. And Senator Lippincott was referencing the Library of Congress and places in which the courts have previously said you can limit speech, and the famous one, of course, yelling fire in a theater. But so a restriction on the First Amendment requires that the restriction pass the strict scrutiny test. And so I just want to pick up a quick definition of that. To pass the strict scrutiny test, the legislature must have passed a law to further a compelling government interest and must have narrowly tailored the law to achieve that interest. Strict scrutiny is the highest standard of review which a court will use to evaluate constitutionality of government discrimination. And so I think that's relevant, obviously, because of what we're talking about here, but I would also just point to the bill as proposed. If you go to, I think it's the underlying bill, and it's page 2 of LB 441, which strikes out, or I guess adds post-secondary education and adds of such libraries of such institutions, and then strikes out public libraries. So it puts cuts across a broad group of people, which would include all public libraries. So we're having a conversation, we're talking about, well, we are still going to allow this defense to be afforded to post-secondary education, but we're not going to allow it to be applied as to libraries that someone over the age of majority would be going to. All libraries under this exception would be subjected to the same standard, whether they are in a K through 6, K through 12, or for adults at anywhere other than, thank you, Madam President, anywhere other than a post-secondary education. So that in of itself is just one place where we're not narrowly tailoring this to the specific purpose we're talking about. And those sorts of things make just the proposal here constitutionally suspect to begin with, aside from all the things we've talked about. And I think this was my third time. Is that true, Madam President? No? All right, I'll push my light and get back in. Thank you. We'll talk again.
Thank you, Senator John Frederickson. Senator Albright, you're recognized.
Okay, thank you. I'm going to go back to, I know people are starting to stream back in, but I just want them to know that about the responsibility that we have on this floor to direct the State Board of Education on what we think is prudent to do for the children. Okay, and just real quick, Senator John Kavanaugh, I did leave out, I told you 28.816 and 28.820. Also 28.817 is actually where they say that if an injunction is requested, any party to the action shall be entitled to a trial of the issues within a 10 calendar days after service of the summons has been completed, and a decision shall be rendered by the court within 2 judicial days of conclusion of the trial. So just for the record, we got that one cleaned up. Okay, so again, this bill that I had asked, and I guess I could still ask education to exec on it, and maybe I'll need to do that because of what's happening here today. But the State Board of Education, it says in the statute 79-760-.01 states that the State Board of Education shall adopt measurable academic content standards for at least the grade levels required for statewide assessment pursuant to section 79-760.03. The standards shall cover the subject areas of reading, writing, mathematics, science, social studies. 2A, the board shall also adopt measurable academic standards for the following as part of the social studies standards. One is the financial literacy that we had passed. The second one was education on the Holocaust and other acts of genocide as recognized by the Congress of the United States or the United Nations as of January 1st of 2022. And B, the board shall also adopt measurable academic content standards for computer science and technology education under mathematics, science, or career and technology education standards. Number 3, academic content standards adopted or recommended pursuant to this section shall be sufficiently clear and measurable to be used for testing student performance with respect to the mastery of the content described in the state standards. And number 4, the State Board of Education shall develop a plan to review and update standards for each subject area every 7 years. The State Board plan shall include a review of commonly accepted standards adopted by school districts. And then we also talked in here in this particular bill that I've included a flow chart from the Accelerate Nebraska for you to look at regarding the governance of Nebraska's K-12 education system. You can, okay, so I wanted to talk about all the different boards that govern and try to legislate, but we have the governor, we have 49 legislators, 8 members of the State Board of Education elected by the people, and then there are 17 educational service units in Nebraska, which have 155 elected officials. School districts have 1,700 board members, and the learning community has 12. Not only do we have all different elected officials, but we have all these advisory groups. There are 5 advisory groups appointed by the governor, which includes educational, telecommunications, information technology, statewide assessments, the Nebraska Library Commission, and the Nebraska Board of Educational Lands and Funds, which we also talked about on Thursday. So the Commission of Education has the Commissioners Advisory Group of 32 appointed members, Special Education Council with 24 appointed members, and the Nebraska Professional Practices Commission, which we can talk a little bit about that I think pertains to this particular bill.
1 minute.
And I think I'm going to go off on that little tangent here for a while, but for some of you that are coming back into the room, I just wanted you to write down the Article 7 of the Constitution of the State of Nebraska, which says that the State Department of Education shall have general supervision and administration over the school system of the state and other activities as the legislature directs. It also says the duties and powers of the State Board of Education shall be prescribed by the legislature, and the Commission of Education shall have the power and duties as the legislature may direct. So what we are doing here today, bringing the obscenity law into play in K through 12 schools, because it's not today, and it's the law of the land except in K through 12 schools. And again, it's beyond me to think that anyone would not want to do all we can to protect the
Time,
children.
Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Moser, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President, and good evening, colleagues and Nebraskans that are still with us. Senator Albright's bill removes a defense against an obscenity charge. It doesn't define obscenity, doesn't change the definition of obscenity. Parents who complain about what they find in the library or what's taught at school still are going to go to the school. The librarian may respond, the principal may respond, the superintendent may get involved. Possibly it would get to the school board and the school board would consider it. But her bill is only after you've been charged, as I understand it, and of a charge of obscenity, and it allows the school employee to use the affirmative defense that they were using it in teaching or whatever those allowances are. So it's a long way from, well, it might be the final decision whether somebody's guilty, but it's a long way from where it starts, and it would start in the school. You know, possibly this would have a chilling effect. Maybe some teachers would be a little more circumspect in what they read in a class or what assignments they give or what books they put in the library. You know, sex education is an important part of growing up, and but most parents have an expectation that when they send their kid to school that they're not going to have materials like we heard about in that hearing, because it was shocking to read some of those accounts of what they experienced. So I admire Senator Albright for wanting to wade into this. It's not a cut and dried, easy thing to do, and she's got a lot of drive to bring this forward. And again, I just think that parents have an expectation that their kids are going to be taught well in school, and that what they learn in school is going to be educational and not as not as uncontrolled as the rest of the real world. It's kind of a special place school. You expect it to be above the fray, and evidently there's some lapses from what I heard from some of the discussions of what happened in the hearing. But again, her bill just removes the affirmative defense. And if there is no obscenity in the school, there would be no charge, and her removal of this affirmative defense will make no difference. So why would you be against it? All this does is shifts the balance a little bit back on the school, that they're doing their job and filtering this so that they're protecting our children. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Moser. Senator Walls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I think I heard Senator Moser say Senator Albright's bill happens only after you've been charged. Only after. I think what we should try to do is prevent that from happening at all. Let's just try to prevent charging our educators, period. Let's be proactive. I do appreciate what Senator Albright's trying to do. I do, and I agree that we need to be very careful about what's in our libraries. Senator Albright stated that and I'm assuming she's talking about educators and librarians, they're not intentionally putting the books on the shelves. But we are, as a legislature, going to intentionally put them behind bars. I think we need to take a step back and really think about the consequences of this bill. Again, I agree that we need to be aware of what's being read in our schools, in our libraries. I don't believe our teachers or our librarians are in any way wanting to harm our kids. I know them pretty well, and I don't think they would ever want to do that. And I certainly don't believe that prosecution of our educators is the answer. I would definitely be in favor of setting up some type of a review process when looking for content in our libraries. In fact, I think that that should happen much more. It's proactive, and it allows an opportunity for parents and educators and school board members to come together and talk about the content, discuss it, and then make decisions. But that is not the bill that's in front of us today. Colleagues, it is important to remember that this has a criminal penalty that will cost a significant amount of money. And it changes people's lives. That is not the way we need to remove content that is not suitable in our schools. We work together, we discuss it, and we make decisions about what's best for our kids and what's best for our schools. This bill is not proactive. It does not prevent any bad content from getting into our schools. It does not bring parents and teachers together to discuss books. Instead, it suggests that teachers and librarians should be subject to fines and jail time. And that is just not the right answer here. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Walls. Senator Erdman, you're next up in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon or evening. I've been listening all afternoon to the discussion on LB 441 and the amendments. I have a question. It may be rhetorical. You decide. Is our education system better today than it was 20 years ago? The answer is no. What has happened in the last 20 years is we've allowed things such as we're discussing today to enter our education system. We have gotten away from teaching reading especially, writing, arithmetic, history. We've gotten away from teaching the basics. And now we've convoluted all that with the smut that we allow young people to see because we now have every child has an iPad or access to the internet. And so I would contend that it all began a long time ago when we took God out of the schools. That's when it started. There's a direct correlation removing God from the schools to a decline in our ACT scores and performance in schools. And Senator Blood mentioned the Bible should be removed because it mentions those things that she discussed. And in Matthew, it says, if anyone comes and causes one of these little ones to stumble, it'll be better for a millstone to be tied around their neck and cast into the deepest sea. So we are placing in front of these children an opportunity for them to see, hear, and ponder the things that they should never be available to them. This bill should have been a consent calendar bill. And if we didn't have a unicameral, this would have been a slam dunk and we'd have moved on. But we have the unicameral, and the way it's set up It prevents good legislation like this from ever making it to the finish line. So I appreciate what Senator Albright is trying to do here. And the vast majority of those people listening to this evening agree with her. 8 years ago, when I arrived here, I never dreamt that we'd be talking about these kind of things, and it would be controversial. It would be controversial to discuss how to protect children. Similar to Senator Holloran's bill protecting children. We've lost our way. We need to figure out who we are as a society and what we need to do to protect young people so they can grow up to be normal citizens who understand what education is to be. It's not indoctrination. So it is surprising that we've spent this much time on this bill when we should have advanced this bill already and moved on. But we will continue probably until we get to 8 hours on this bill. And those of you watching back home, that's how it works here in the unicameral. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Erdman. Senator Holdcroft, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. You know, I'm really the wrong kind of guy to be addressing this English literature stuff. I'm really a STEM kind of guy, science, technology. My wife is a math and science teacher, middle school. I'm an engineer. All 5 of my kids graduated with engineering degrees, but I guess you got to have it in the school. But I remember my high school English classes, and there were some great authors we read, John Steinbeck, Shakespeare, and I don't understand why we're introducing these books that have to have some kind of a scene or some sexual innuendo included in them. There's some great classics out there that I think express the same kind of things. I'm going to go back to a couple of my emails. Go back to the grandmother who's talking about what she'd like to see the schools doing for her grandchildren. Her continuing, she said, schools are supposed to prepare our youth to function in society. They need math, reading, writing, and maybe some preparation on managing their checking accounts, credit card debt, and developing a budget. The Nebraska exemption 28-815 has been on the books since 1977. How much obscenity did you see in school that was provided to you by the school system? How many books could you find that had the F-bomb 62 times in the book? Until recently, schools didn't have much obscene material. Now, with all the liberal special interest groups initiatives, obscene material is in our schools down to the 1st and 2nd grade level. This is absolute. There is absolutely no need for this type of material to be provided to them. I'm sure we can use our resources in a better way. We were able to educate previous generations without obscene material, and we can do it again. I ask that you support LB 441 and get the obscene pornographic materials out of our schools. And let me just go to my next constituent here. Dear Senators, I am writing to request you to support LB 441. It is our duty to protect the innocence of our children. They have plenty of time to hear profanity and be exposed to sexual content when they grow up. School is not an appropriate place for this to happen. School is a place for kids to learn skills that will make them successful in life and skills that will help our country, for example, reading, writing, science, history, even wood shops and theater. Our test scores are down. We are becoming less competitive with the world. It is also the government's responsibility to respect people's hard work and be good stewards of tax dollars, which people are required to pay.
Our schools should be spending the hard-earned tax dollars to help our children learn skills that will make them successful in life and that will help our country compete in the world. Books with pornography, images, and profane language are not helping our kids or our country. And just one more. I just wanted to follow up after Friday's hearing. Thank you for your listening ears. It was not easy to read such filth, and as you know, it wasn't easy to hear it. However,
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. However, as someone stated from the proponent side, many of us have been going to our local school boards. I have been to several state boards of education meetings where pornographic literary works were read to our representatives. Prior to the recent election, Kirk Penner has been the only State Board of Education member to take a stance against such graphic and obscene materials. I really hope you see that closing the loophole in Statute 28815 will solve many issues involving what is available on the school library shelves. Obscenity and child pornography are not protected under the First Amendment. And I'll relinquish the rest of my time. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Holdcroft. Senator Dover, you're recognized.
Thank you. I've been listening to the conversation. I think both sides are sometimes arguing different points and some are arguing the exact same point. But I was trying to think of maybe somehow some way to enter into the discussion in a different way and have some new material. So I actually thought I was going to got a hold of the transcript, but I thought I could read part of the transcript because people talk about how horrible it is. And I wasn't going to actually read the exact words. I was going to put just the letter out there, which everyone would know what the words were. But I mean, when we start looking at that, I didn't even want to do that because it's basically the N word, the F word, the P word, and those things have no place in K through 12. I mean, absolutely no place. I want to thank Senator Albright for bringing this bill. And I think there used to be a time when I grew up, it's kind of different. And I've just seen generationally it changed, which was kind of a mutual respect for one's beliefs. And I think that is also an issue to talk about here, because I think when you have a mutual respect of one's beliefs, you don't necessarily go to places that would agitate, upset, and those kind of things another person. I mean, that allows people of different family backgrounds, those kind of things, to actually exist. And I think, as other senators have brought up, I really believe that school needs to be a neutral place. It needs a place of learning. It needs a place not of sexuality and those kind of things. It's not as though we're saying sexuality is bad or anything. It's a natural thing of life, but I just don't think that we need to insult or cause frustration, anxiety, those kind of things for some families that believe that is their right, and it is their right to introduce sexuality in how they see fit, and obviously know what the range that is in varying families across the country. But I don't believe that school is a place for sexuality. And obviously some of the things that were written across in the transcripts during the hearing, it's amazing to even think that would exist. And it's so far from when was brought up. I can't even imagine, and I can't be quite truthfully even believe that some of that reading material would even be found inside of a school. But I do support, again, Senator Albright. I'm very glad that she brought this not in the way some of them are accusing her of bringing it. She's bringing it so that we can make sure our kids are free in an environment that is healthy, that they feel comfortable in, and that would be the best place to learn, wouldn't it? I mean, when you're in a safe place, you can learn more. And that's all that Senator Albright is trying to do, is create a safe place where they can learn to read, math, those kind of things, science, etc. So again, I just want to thank Senator Albright for bringing this, for prioritizing this, and I'll yield the remainder of my time to the Senator Albright. Thank you, Senator.
Senator Albright, you're yielded 2 minutes.
Wonderful. Thank you, Senator Dover, for your comments. And again, this is not to upset teachers or librarians, or let me tell you what I learned in education, sitting on the education committee, if something happens today, let's say it was a coach that, maybe was grooming a child in whatever way, and today, there are coaches still coaching in schools today because they get to go before a professional practice commission, a commission that's of their peers. And sometimes it takes a while to be heard in front of that group.
1 minute.
I'm like totally taken back when I heard that that's how they handle things in the public schools. So if you've done something so egregious that maybe you need to go move over to this other side of Nebraska and maybe take up teaching there, or maybe become a superintendent somewhere else, or I'm just saying, I have been educated in education in ways that make me pause about our system today. And we are going to fix that. It's been voted out of committee, I believe, that we just have to know that it is our duty, and we swore to take care of our oath of office to protect. Protect property, to protect the children, to protect families, to protect Nebraskans. And I'm telling you, this is a simple bill. But if somebody is doing what we're going to talk about.
Time, Senator.
Thank you. That's good.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Senator Brandt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. Would Senator Albright yield to a question?
Senator Albright, will you yield?
Yes.
I know you've had a long day so far, and we've probably got an hour and a half to go. I kind of like what Senator Walz was saying before about setting up a review process with the schools. Why we step back here and we look at who's in charge of what, and obviously, to me, the state school board should be doing something. If everybody's offended by these same books over and over and over again, why doesn't our state school board set up a review process for all the schools in the state and the private schools and the homeschoolers? Why aren't they doing something about this?
Why aren't the superintendents doing something, or the state board?
No. The state school board. Why don't they establish a review committee and review these books for all the school systems, so you don't have to have each of the 243 school systems do it independently, because you're going to get 243 different results?
Well, that's a great question. And certainly I won't be around next year, but maybe I can pass the torch to you. But what I'm going to say to that is that we've had this problem, talking about a lot of problems throughout our state in a lot of different school districts. There's a map out there, that Senator Kirk Pinter was showing the State Board of Education about where all these books are at. How do they even get into our school? Why would we even be allowing something like that into our schools? So yeah, that's great. But if we don't have the obscenity law that is out there that says you cannot put these things in our schools, you cannot show these children the wrong things, or no one's above the law. Whether somebody's grooming someone or whether somebody intentionally shows it, our children, if they see this stuff, trust me, they're on their laptop showing it to their friends. And I don't mean to take your time, but we have a lot of cleaning up to do here, and it's our job as legislators to lead.
All right. Thank you, Senator Albright. I guess my concern is maybe we're going after some symptoms instead of the root problem, and I would yield the rest of my time to Senator Dungan.
Senator Dungan, you're yielded 2 minutes, 31 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President, and thank you, Senator Brandt. I do appreciate that. I just want to pick up where Senator John Kavanaugh left off, talking about the constitutionality of this, because when we start to draft these laws, I think sometimes we forget to make sure that we're adhering to our baseline constitutional principles. He was talking about whether or not this implicates fundamental rights and whether it infringes upon a fundamental right. In our jurisprudence, if a fundamental right is being infringed upon, or if it ultimately currently is being legislated, then the court has to use strict scrutiny in order to determine whether or not that law is constitutional. In this circumstance, the fundamental right that's being implicated is freedom of speech. Now, that's not to say that all speech is allowed. Obviously, you can't yell fire in a crowded room, and obscenity laws are often on the books. But when you're talking about restricting speech in any way, our courts have long recognized that speech is a fundamental right that is inherently important to American society. It's in our Constitution, our Bill of Rights. And so when you implicate freedom of speech, the court has to utilize strict scrutiny to determine if that law is constitutional. Again, because I think Senator John Kavanaugh might continue talking about it when I'm done here, strict scrutiny means that the law itself has to be going towards a compelling governmental interest. That's the language they use, a compelling governmental interest, and it has to be narrowly tailored to achieve that interest. So it's sort of a two-prong analysis or a test. And what's interesting about the law here, and I guess thank you, Madam President, one of my many concerns that I have about LB 441 is I don't believe it would actually stand up to that scrutiny potentially, given the fact that it does not particularly seem narrowly tailored. In fact, the law is specifically cutting out librarians and teachers while seemingly arbitrarily leaving medical professionals or doctors in other areas. And so I think there's a concern that has been raised by some that I've spoken to, understandably, that this is an arbitrary and capricious delineation of different professions. We're saying one job is different than another, and we're saying this job matters more than this one with regards to the protections they could have. And I fear, colleagues, that that is not a narrowly tailored statute going towards any sort of compelling governmental interest. We always have to adhere to our fundamental rights and ensure that our laws are constitutional. So with that, I appreciate the time, Senator Brandt, and thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senators Brandt, Albright, and Dungan. Senator John Kavanaugh, you're recognized, and this is your third opportunity.
Thank you, Madam President. And I always appreciate following my row mate, Senator Dungan, in a conversation about strict scrutiny and compelling governmental interests. And I just kind of I think it does need repeating multiple times because folks, I appreciate what Senator Dover was saying is that people seem to be like talking in two tracks here. And the one track, which is I would posit is the accurate one, is that obscenity is not allowed in schools. I watched that state Board of Education meeting where Mr. Penner put up a picture and he had a red line and said obscenity is illegal here and it's legal here in schools. That's just not true. So there are lots of complexity and nuance about what is obscenity. That's one conversation. But once something has been found to be obscene and not protected speech, then it can be banned, and it can be banned anywhere. And it is. You can't show it to children, right? And the statutes, as currently written, allow for an affirmative defense, meaning once somebody is charged with one of the violations under, I think it's 28.813 or under 28.810, I think was the other section. There are two separate tracks for affirmative defenses. But again, somebody has to be charged first, which means I've already said this meets this definitional standard of obscene, and then they have an opportunity to attempt to say it meets an exception after that fact. So it does not allow for people to go and give out the things that we all agree are obscene, right? But a lot of the conversation here is conflating what is obscene and what is something you don't like. And the Constitution, the reason for this strict scrutiny standard, the reason for this high threshold and protection is because the Constitution protects not just your speech, but everyone else's speech, and it protects speech that you find unfavorable, unpleasant, uncomfortable. Speech you don't like is protected by the Constitution. And so that's why when we make laws about things like this, they are held to a high standard, a strict scrutiny, because we have to first, as Senator Dungan correctly pointed out, identify a compelling governmental interest. which could argue protecting children is compelling. But then the action of the government to serve that interest must be narrowly tailored to the service of that interest. And this bill doesn't do that. And making it overly broad to cover things, which, well, by the way, does not address what is the content. It just addresses specifically who is afforded protection, which is the part that violates strict scrutiny. But all of the people here who are advocating for this bill are talking about language they find disfavorable, which is constitutionally protected. And that's the problem. We can find ways to work within the confines of the Constitution to protect children and to make people feel better, I guess. But we cannot violate the Constitution in the service.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President, of what some of us find disfavorable. So I would again point you to the definition in the Nebraska Supreme Court case that says that the standard for determining this is not the most offended person and not the least offended person. It's the average person standard, and that is determined by a jury. So I think I'm out of time. Madam President said that was my third time. So I would encourage your green vote on the bracket, and I assume I probably will get a chance to talk after we dispose of that at some point. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh. Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. So I'm reading the introduced bill and going over it and listening to the debate and listening to what Senator Walls brought up about not prosecuting teachers to begin with. It seems like, I don't know how many of you ever watched Happy Days, but the phrase jump the shark, seems like we've jumped the shark with this, that we're going a bit further without taking any other steps to try and mitigate what it is that is trying to be mitigated. So again, I would say, as a parent of school-age children who go to public school, this is not my experience in Omaha. Not at all my experience in Omaha. My youngest comes home with Who Would Win books, which are really fascinating. They're pitting different animals or insects against each other, listing out their characteristics, and then predicting who would win a fight between the two of them. He's obsessed with them. They are really cool, though, to learn about different animals and insects. And my oldest is coming home with Babysitter Club, which is basically teaching young girls about economics, teaching them how to be entrepreneurs from a very young age. And then we are reading the A to Z Mysteries. It's a chapter book that my husband and I take turns reading the chapter. So obviously tonight he will be reading the chapter. We just uncovered who the jewel thief was at a Penguin concert. Very riveting stuff here. These are the things that are coming into my house from my kids' school. And I've never had a moment's concern about it being inappropriate or salacious at all. So I find it very incongruous to say we need to be putting into statute this type of enforcement. Because I've believed that my teachers, my school, and other schools in Omaha are doing an excellent job of curating a thoughtful and diverse selection of books that are helping not only engage their curiosity, but teach them about the world around them. And I worry about when it comes to the time when they will be learning in their social studies classes about the history of slavery in this country, or when it comes to their public growth classes when it comes to learning about their reproductive health. What is a bill like this going to do to my children's education? So I do think of this as very personal, because my children are being educated in public elementary schools right now. And this is not my experience. And I wonder if, I haven't heard any senator who has school-age children get up here today and say that this is their experience. And there are several of us that have school-age children. Senator Wayne, Senator McKinney, Senator Hunt, Senator Bozen, Senator Conrad, Senator Vargas's kids are actually a little too young for school age. But I haven't heard a single senator with school-age children
1 minute
get up and say anything about this. I apologize. I was going to yield my time and I went off a bit. I'm going to yield the remainder of my time to Senator Blood.
Senator Blood, you're yielded 45 seconds.
I will talk really fast. Thank you, Mrs. President. Sorry, you got married all of a sudden. I just want to respond to Senator Holdcroft's comments very quickly. I went back to the books that I grew up on. I'm not that much younger than you, if not close to the same age. Charlotte's Web, being banned. God, Are You There? It's Me, Margaret, being banned. Nowadays, Harry Potter, because witchcraft is being banned. Diary of a Young Girl by Anne Frank, being banned. I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings, being banned. Because, who wants the role of personal voice when it comes to racism and rape and poverty? Don't fool yourselves. When you open this door, this is what's going on in other states. We can't keep playing pretend. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Blood. Senator Linehan, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. It's so dark in here when it gets this time of night. I'm not sure all the senators are still around, but if Senator Duggan and Senator John Kavanaugh are here, I might have questions for you. That's your heads up. Senator Duggan talked about a fundamental right, freedom of speech. Absolutely. We have a fundamental right. But I don't think in any common sense measure that means that that fundamental right exists, that adult can say anything or show anything to a child. It's like common sense left the room. So what do you mean by that, Senator Duggan? I'll give you a couple minutes to think about that. And then someone talked about educators getting arrested. What would an educator have to do, maybe this is a good one for John Kavanaugh, that you would actually get arrested? And compelling government interests, I think was Senator John Kavanaugh. Yes, you're right. It is a compelling government interest to protect our children. Very compelling. So, Senator Duggan, are you available for a question?
Senator Duncan, will you yield?
Is he not here? John Kavanaugh, would you yield?
Senator John Kavanaugh, will you yield?
Yes.
So, Senator Kavanaugh, does my freedom, fundamental right of freedom to speech, extend when I'm talking to a 6-year-old?
Your freedom of speech? Sure.
So I can say anything to a 6-year-old and that's fine?
Well, no.
But am I covered under freedom of speech?
Well, you have to, it's more nuanced than just you can say whatever you want. And the governmental interest is that there is a governmental interest first.
What can't I say to a 6-year-old?
Well, I'm probably not going to say that here.
What about an eighth grader? Are there rules about what we should say to 8th graders?
So here's the problem, that there is a spectrum, of course, of age and what's appropriate. And then, of course, there's a spectrum of governmental interests. And then there is yet another spectrum of what is the way in which the government constrains you as a citizen or as a person who has right freedom of speech. The constraint must
Okay,
be
I've heard you say it several times, and it's my 5 minutes. An educator getting arrested. Give me an example of how that would happen.
You're asking me how an educator is going to get arrested?
Yes, because I've heard all day, or most of the day, a lot of the day, that that's one of our concerns here. If this bill passes, as Senator Albright, that we're going to end up rounding up educators and arresting them.
Well, I mean, I could posit some suggestions, but I think the concern is that if say somebody in a community thinks that a book that was listed here is obscene and a teacher has it in a classroom, that then somebody in that community would go to the law enforcement and say, this teacher has, I don't know what the books are, but we'll say, All Boys Are Not Blue in their classroom. I find it offensive. It's obscene.
So you think a police would turn the sirens on and go arrest that teacher?
Well, no,
Has that been your life experience? That's what happens?
I think in a
Neighbor complains, the cops come and arrest somebody?
does definitely happen.
1
yes.
minute.
Yeah. Does it happen in schools? I have one other question for Senator Michaela Cavanaugh.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, will you yield?
Yes.
You talked about your children in public school, right?
Yes.
Are they in OPS?
They're in West Side.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senators Michaela Cavanaugh, Senator John Cavanaugh, and Senator Linehan. Senator Bosselman, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. This is about children. Children. I've read the transcript. If you haven't read the transcript, if you're at home and you're watching, if you haven't read the transcript on this bill, go online and read it. It's smut. It's pornographic. It's horrible. If anyone on this floor wants to try to read that on the mic, television would probably bleep you out of the things it talks about the intercourse between a boy and a girl, oral, other, in explicit detail. That's pornographic. That's obscene. That should not be in the schools where our children can read. If you want that read on the mic, we can read that on the mic. But I think everybody in here would be horribly embarrassed by what it is. I oppose the bracket. I support LB 441. And if people who oppose this bill oppose it, what's the amendment? What's the amendment? Because that's serious. I yield the rest of my time, Senator Halloran.
Thank you.
Senator Halloran, you're yielded 3 minutes, 35 seconds.
Thank you, Senator Bosselman. Be prepared to be embarrassed. And for NETV, be prepared to start blipping out the words. And if you got children at home watching this, I would mute it or send them to the other room. I'm going to read from the transcript Senator Bosselman spoke about. Quote, today I'm going to talk to you. This is from a proponent of 441. Today I'm going to talk to you about a library book that I found in 16 different libraries across Nebraska. In 5 of these schools use this book as an accelerated reader, Senator Kavanaugh's, meaning they quiz the students for points after they've read it. The book is called Lucky by Alice Sebold. Quote, I'm going to read you some passages directly from the book that's available to minors in our schools. I did. My focus became acute. I started harder than ever at him. This is talking about a young girl. He began to knead his fists against the opening of my vagina, inserting his fingers into it 3 or 4 at a time. Something tore. I began to bleed there. I was wet now, Senator Kavanaugh. I'm excited. I made him excited. He was intrigued and worked his whole fist into my vagina and pumped it. And it went into my brain. Stop staring at me, he said. I'm sorry, I said. You're strong. I tried. I liked it. He started humping me again, wildly. The base of my spine was crushed into the ground. Glass cut in my back and behind. He kneeled back, raised your legs, he said. Spread them. Give me a blowjob, he said. He was standing now. I was grounded on the ground trying to search about the filth of my clothes. He kicked me and I crawled into a ball. I want a blowjob, Senator Kavanaugh. He held his dick in his hand. I don't know how, I said. What do you mean you don't know how? I've never done it before, I said. I'm a virgin. Put it in your mouth. I kneeled before him, Senator Kavanaugh. That's language that should not be in front of children. I'm sorry I had to read it. We talk about the transcript. We talk about the transcript. We talk about my kids haven't experienced this in my school. It doesn't matter if it's just one school that experiences this, is one too many. We have a lot of lawyerly type of folks in this room, Senator Kavanaugh, Senator Dungan. We have a lot of lawyerly type people in here that could be proposing amendments to fix the complaints they're complaining about. This bill, fix it. Don't throw it away, fix it. It's a problem, Senator Dungan. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senator Halloran. Senator Hunt, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would yield my time to Senator John Kavanaugh.
Senator John Kavanaugh, you're yielded 4 minutes, 52 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Senator Hunt. Thank you, Senator Halloran. I would ask you if you've read any of the rest of that book. I would ask you what the context of that scene is. I think you missed the point. There are graphic scenes in books. There are graphic things that happen to people in life. And stories have context. And they give meaning to the people who read them, who feel alone. And they feel like this helps them navigate the difficulties of life. And yes, life is gross and dirty and unpleasant. But that is what life is. And people who experience that want to know they're not alone. And young people especially want to know that they're not alone. It helps them get through these situations. So you have to, the whole point of this conversation is not that there are things that are unpleasant in these books. The whole point is that we cannot make a determination writ large about what has value and to whom it has value. And so you can be provocative and say those things, but that does not mean that we have the right to ban books. And that's what we're talking about here. We're talking about, Senator Linehan, threatening teachers with incarceration so that they don't put books that we find distasteful on their shelves, threatening librarians with incarceration so they don't carry books that we find distasteful. This is not about actually incarcerating people because, Senator Halloran, I can't propose amendments to fix this bill because it is such a mess. It is incomprehensible. No one knows what it does. But what it does do is purposefully has a chilling effect on educators and librarians. So that's what the problem is here. It is unfixable. It is a bill to make you feel good about the fact that you don't like these books. Don't read them. I haven't read that one. I might now. I'm curious. But that's not what this is about. So I'm told that I think it's Senator Michaela Cavanaugh would like to yield to a question.
Senator Michaela Cavanaugh, will you yield?
Yes.
Did you want to yield to a question?
You want me to just say something? How much time is left?
1 minute, 55 seconds.
I will wait until Senator Walz yields me some of her time. Thank you, Senator John Kavanaugh.
All right. Well, Senator Dungan, would you yield to a question?
Senator Dungan, will you yield?
Yes.
So before you got me on the hook for answering questions from Senator Linehan, she asked about how is a teacher going to be arrested? And I thought maybe you could speak to your experience about people being perhaps arrested on some circumstances and how that might come to arise for an educator.
Sure. So I'll try to be brief about this. Just because an affirmative defense exists does not mean that the prosecution is not going to bring charges. Now, do I think that there are going to be an onslaught, a massive onslaught of people being arrested for this? I don't necessarily, but I agree with your chilling effect comment. The way it would actually go, to your point, is there'd be a citation issued upon an investigation, and at that point in time, that would go to the county attorney.
1 minute.
Thank you, Madam President. And if a county attorney ultimately deemed that there was probable cause to bring a charge, they would do so, even if the affirmative defense exists. So the existence of the affirmative defense does not negate or get rid of the prosecution. So if there was such ample evidence that something was in fact obscene, that this would be brought and ultimately charged, that would be up to the police officer doing a citation and the county attorney ultimately filing the complaint. It's a misdemeanor, filing the complaint on this, and then that would proceed through the court process as normal.
Thank you. How much time do we have?
22 seconds.
Oh, 22 seconds. Well, I appreciate Senator Dungan clarifying that. But yes, again, we're putting people potentially at harm of prosecution to solve a problem that we're not equipped to solve, is honestly what it is. So thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Senators Hunt, Michaela Kavanaugh, John Kavanaugh, and Dungan. Senator Walls, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. I just want to reiterate that, honestly, the hearing was awful. I don't think anybody would be okay with that. It honestly was. From what I've read, it was awful. I'm just saying that I think there are some other ways that we can find solutions to this problem. Senator Sanders had a bill that Senator Meyer prioritized. It's LB 71, and it certainly, I don't think is the complete answer, but it is a bill about transparency. And it would grant general access by parents and guardians to teaching materials, practices, activities, examinations, and so forth. The bill also directs each school district to adopt a policy that would comply with this directive. I think that's a possible solution. I think it's a way better solution when we're talking about actually preventing books from even getting on those shelves. I hope that our colleagues would maybe just take a step back and think about how we could expand on a bill like Senator Sanders that Senator Meyer prioritized. And with that, I will yield the rest of my time to Senator Michaela Kavanaugh.
Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, you're yielded 3 minutes, 7 seconds.
Thank you, Madam President. Colleagues, that was beyond the pale. That was harassing. That was about a book about sexual violence. I have done nothing but try to have a respectful debate with Senator Albright about her bill that impacts my children. That was so out of line and unnecessary and disgusting to say my name over and over again like that. That is so inappropriate. And if you all have questions for attorneys, you have a prosecutor sitting right there who voted for this bill. Why don't you ask her some of the questions? Or why don't you get up and talk about this bill, why you voted for it? Let's have a real conversation, but don't start reading rape scenes and saying my name over and over again, Senator Halloran. You don't know anything about anyone else's life. And I can tell you that women in this body have
been subject to sexual violence. I didn't know you were capable of such cruelty. That was so unbecoming of you and unbecoming of this body. And I hope that some other people who are Republicans will stand up and defend me. That was so inappropriate. And it was unbecoming for Senator Albright's priority bill. She has maintained a level of integrity in this debate, as have many of us, and you have not, Senator Halloran. That was obscene. I yield my time to the chair.
Thank you, Senator Kavanaugh. Mr. Clerk, for items.
Madam President, an amendment from Senator Merman to LB 1329 to be printed. That's all I have at this time.
Senator Albright, you're recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. And to Senator Michaela Kavanaugh, I was mortified that you, whether your name was put in it, was not right. I left the floor. I don't want to listen to this, but deep down inside, this is what's happening. And the transcripts are there. People can read. People can read what our Judiciary Committee had to sit through for hours. And we're trying to protect those things that we are appalled by. I'm so sorry that your name was injected into that. Is absolutely, I will be the first to stand up and say I'm sorry. I'm sorry that we even have to read anything like this. Quite frankly, if it's on our television right now, we could probably get our FCC license taken away. But yet this is in our schools. This is what's going on. And I don't want to see this elevated to any level. I just want to talk. There are attorneys on the floor. I wanted to get up and talk about exactly, what Senator Kavanaugh and Senator Duncan were talking about. I have answers. I have answers to the questions. But this, I never went to anyone. And I can tell you, this bill is my priority. It's something I've been dealing with for 4 years, but never once did I go to anybody in this room and say, hey, would you sign on? This is a great bill. I want this discussion. I thank Senator Conrad for putting this bracket motion up. I thank her from the bottom of my heart that we can have this discussion, because if it's painful and it hurts us, it's worse for our children. And that's why we're talking about this. It is a simple bill that it includes obscenity in the law. If any one of our teachers or our librarians knew that that's what was in the book that she just checked out, or that the teacher asked questions about, that is so wrong. That is so wrong. So whether we just have to let them know what the parameters are. If it falls under obscenity, it is illegal to do that in K through 12 to children from kindergarten to 12th grade and everything in between. I mean, let's get back to where we need to be on this. And I'm sorry that it really had to come to all of this. But again, so I know that we talked about 441. It does not affect the First Amendment. The language of Nebraska's obscenity definition in our current law has already been found constitutional. I have to prove that to you folks. Strict scrutiny is not involved in 441. And if, 28808 should change the statute. 441 changes nothing about the obscenity restrictions already in law. We're not changing anything that's already there. This obscenity language was already approved by the United States Supreme Court in New York versus Ginsburg. That's for you folks that are attorneys to figure out and come back to the floor and let's talk about it. That is Ginsburg versus New York, 1968. For these reasons, there's nothing to fix in LB 441. The fix could only occur in 28808, the obscenity statute, and that's this bill. Very simple. Again, I want to stay on task here. Okay. So the term obscenity and pornography are often used interchangeably, and they are different under the law. Obscenity is a legal term of art that applies to certain depictions of sex that are not protected by the constitutional guarantee of free speech. Pornography is a non-legal term with a broader meaning. It pertains to depictions of erotic and lewd behavior, including works with artistic or literary merit. By definition, obscenity lacks such merit. All obscenity is pornographic, but not all pornography is legally obscene. Okay, so they always go to, like everything in here, which I've not talked about, is the Miller versus California, 413 U.S. 15 in 1973. The United States Supreme Court.
Time, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Albright. Mr. Clerk, for a motion?
Mr. President, amendments reprinted from Senator Clements to LB 1412 and 1413. Finally, a priority motion, Senator Hunt would move to adjourn the body until Tuesday, March 19, 2024 at 9:00 a.m.
Speaker Arch, you are allowed to speak to this motion. You are recognized.
Thank you, Madam President. This is a very difficult debate, very difficult topic, and it obviously has great sensitivities. We've had a long day, and I do support this motion. There's times when we just have to step back from the debate, and I think this is one of those times. So I do support the motion to adjourn. I would also indicate that the first items up tomorrow on the agenda will be the budget on select. And so if you need to review anything, that would be the items for first thing tomorrow morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Speaker Arch. Colleagues, you've heard the question. The motion. The question is, shall the legislature adjourn? All those in favor say aye. All those opposed say nay. The motion is successful. We are adjourned.